Good morning. I'm Jackie Stevens from Grace Fellowship Baptist Church in Meridian, Mississippi, and I'm the adult Sunday school teacher. We are now starting a new series of lessons on humor in the Bible. Now, most of us don't really think of the Bible as being a real chuckler when we read it, but there are some really good passages that share with us the joy we should feel as Christians. As I was reading through these lessons and looking over some to come, I thought, well, what are the joy pockets in my life? What are things that bring me joy or provide me an opportunity to be glad? I realize that some of them are being able to pray about things that I'm excited about or am grateful for. Also, if friends or even my family are having challenges, it's an opportunity to share, and I'm glad that there's that in my life. Other things are like hobbies or interests, a good book. I once told one of my student teachers that you should build in something into your day to look forward to. And I got a rather odd look. And I said, well, if it's nothing more than a good lunch, but a time to spend with a student or share with a student, to laugh with them, to give them a hug. Those kind of things were important to me as their teacher. Other things I enjoy spending time with my family members, laughing together, watching a movie together. I always love digging through antique stores or flea markets. I don't do it much anymore because my life has been threatened by my husband. But the idea that there are those objects that are interesting. Another joyful thing may be cleaning out. You run across things and you realize an hour has passed, but that object you found hit a nerve, hit a memory, something that you found joy in or you want to stop and reflect on for a small period of time. Maybe a sermon that brought you much joy or answered questions that you were concerned about as a Christian. Being creative, using a talent. All of these are joys that God provides for us if we are willing to accept them. So today we're going to take a look at the book of Proverbs and several verses in Proverbs that address this matter of joy in our life. We know that we hunger for uncomplicated joy. You know, people always say, I just want to be happy. Like they have to make it or bake it or find it or whatever. Joy comes actually from a knowledge of God, which is what Proverbs tell us. And we have to admit that sometimes, if we're honest, it can be really hard to come by joy. There are things that happen in our life that are not funny, they are not humorous, they are not easy to deal with, and so we struggle with this matter of how we find joy in these things. We've also been told that a cheerful heart is like good medicine. Well, it really is. I think it really helps when we can find joy in those things around us. One of the great theologians of our time is Charlie Brown of Peanuts. And Charlie Brown says that most of us would probably put another word in the sentence that provides that fact that the most infallible proof of God's presence is joy. Some of us might choose another word. We might say commitment or love or forgiveness. But I think Charlie is probably onto something when he says that we are Christians and people will know us by our joy. So let's take a look at the first couple of verses. This is from Proverbs 15, 13 through 15, and I'm reading from one of the newer versions because I just like the way that it was expressed. Our first one says, a joyful heart brightens one's face, but a troubled heart breaks the spirit. An understanding heart seeks knowledge, but fools feed on folly. All the days of the needy are hard, but a happy heart is a continual feast. So let's explore that a little bit. Joy has the power to overcome hardships in our life. And many times we face many hardships. It's really interesting to find somebody that seems to have one hardship after the other, and yet they remain positive. So our author introduced me, at least, to a brand new word called acedia. And I have never heard this word, so I looked it up. And acedia is actually a word from the Middle Ages that it means sloth or indifference. And the most obvious indication of the acedia is just repeated shrug of the shoulders. I can remember students where I would ask them a question and I would get, or they might add, I don't know. And so you'd come back around after there'd been some discussion and you would ask them again. And of course you could tell they hadn't been listening to any of the conversation. And so they really didn't care about the lesson. When we are affected by this condition, nothing matters much. In other words, the bed doesn't get made, the lawn doesn't get mowed, nobody goes for groceries, the dishes are all piled in the sink. There's a total feeling of listlessness, or that you have moved yourself onto a mindless treadmill. You're apathetic. You have no interest. And so this can affect us either in our personal life, in a cooperative life, and it affects everybody emotionally and spiritually. There's just nothing that inspires. So we come to the idea of we need to care about something. Now, after I read this lesson, I looked up at my husband and I said, well, I've always wondered how you would describe us, but we must be sitting at a continual feast. This author, Robert Capon, had this to say in a book called Bed and Board. The tinfoil collectors and fancy ribbon savers may be absurd, but they're not crazy. They're the ones who will still retain the capacity for wonder that is the root of caring. When a little boy finds an old electric motor on a junk heap, he is pierced to the heart by the weight, the windings, and the silent turning of it. When he gets home, his mother is appalled and tells him to throw it out. Most likely he will cry. It is his first and truest reaction to the affluent society. He usually forgets, but we shouldn't forget that joy. He is sane, society isn't. He possesses because he cares. We don't. So when we find things that interest us or inspire us, it's amazing that when you really look at the indications within the life of an artist and you ask them how they got started, many times they had no intention of finding what they found. The other day we were watching television and it highlighted a wood turner in Wiggins, Mississippi. And he said he went to Branson, Missouri on a vacation, and he happened to stop by this area where a wood turner was working. And his wife said, well, I'm going to go on and look around. And she said she came back 2 or 3 hours later and he's still in the same spot. And it inspired him, and now he makes turned bowls. So many times we may not even be looking for that inspiration, but having that joy in our life is important. We see life as a continual feast. There's always an interest or something we want to do or we want to share. And then if we look in Proverbs 16, 23 and 24, we read these words. The mind of the wise makes their speech insightful. and enhances the teaching of their lips. Pleasant words are flowing honey, sweet to the taste, and healing to the bones. Now, thinking about this, if we were looking for the continual feast, it's also important that we are thinking about what we have to say to other people. I love one of my former colleagues at Northeast Middle School here in Lauderdale County. She had a sign outside her classroom that said "Children under construction," meaning that nobody in there was ever going to get it perfectly right. No, everybody was working on who they would become. And I think the words that she shared with them were important. First, it reminds us how important it is to hear the words of the gospel. I love the movie that came out in 1960 of Pollyanna. Haley Mills played a little girl. The family had lost their father and they'd moved to a new community. And Carl Malden was the pastor. And oh, as she put it to him, "You do preach something fierce." Well, one day she happens on the pastor out in, I would say, another meadow or wherever, and he's sitting on a log. And she comes up and asks if he needs help with his sermons. And he let her know real quick that he did not. And knowing that he was not the most positive of preachers, she says to him, "You know, we used to help my dad with his sermons." And he said, "Oh, you did?" Said, "Yes." And said he came across something one day that changed the whole way he preached. And Carl Malden said, "What was that?" And she said, "Well, this is the only thing I have left of him," and it was a necklace. And she said, "The saying is engraved in here." And he said, "Oh, you found it in the scripture?" She said, "No. It says, when you look for the bad and expect it, you will absolutely find it." She said, "Did you know that changed him?" So he made up his mind he was going to preach glad things. And according to Pollyanna, in the Bible, there are 800 references or glad pages. And from that time on, I think it made an impression on that minister. There are glad pages in the Bible, and pages that are comforting and caring. And so we need to watch our words. I know many times my words have been slaying and unkind and unthinking. And all of us have experienced that. And we just shudder at some of the things that we have to say, like the arrows. Why do we do that? Well, for the most part, we do those things when we're angry. We let the words fly. When we are frustrated. When we have lack of empathy. When we are afraid. All of these things come tumbling out, and we say things that we would just love to reach out and pull back, but it's too late. So we need to be aware of what we're saying as far as expressing the joy that's in our heart. Again, let's look at Proverbs 17:22, and the idea that a cheerful heart is a good medicine. A cheerful heart is a good medicine, but a downcast spirit dries up the bones. Our author shared an illustration that I think I've actually heard before. Norman Cousins wrote a fascinating book titled Anatomy of an Illness, and he details his recovery from a really serious disease. And he decided he was going to be his own doctor, and he was going to be his own prescriber of medication. And what he chose was big doses of vitamins and regular laughter. He watched all the comedy movies he could possibly find, laughing out loud. Before laughter and after laughter, he examined himself. His sessions with the movies began to have their effect. In fact, he found that it was a great aid in his recovery. Now, have you ever thought what happens to your body when you laugh? Things happen chemically. In other words, your face lights up, or you get so tickled you can't possibly calm down. Particularly in church, it's hard. And many times we find that laughter just makes us feel good. There's power in it. And church is a place where people who are hurting and unhappy and cannot find any joy need to come to feel better. We're going to close with some ideas from C.S. Lewis that reminds us that joy is the serious business of heaven. He said, "I know that my tendency to use images like play and dance for the highest things is a stumbling block to you. You call it heartless. You feel it is a brutal mockery of every martyr and every slave. Dance games are frivolous, unimportant down here, for down here is not your natural place. Here they are moments rest from the life we were placed here to live. But in this world, everything is upside down. Joy is the serious business of heaven. We are looking for the blessings of a cheerful heart and pleasant words. I want to close with these thoughts. We know we can live the good life without money, fame, pleasure, or achievement, but we cannot live it without joy. Joy, it turns out, is not only the serious business of heaven, it is also the serious business of our individual lives. Thank you for joining me today, and hope to see you again next Sunday.